At one time, the Tallgrass Prairie stretched all the way from Texas to Canada. Bison roamed free, and the grasses were like an inland sea waving in the wind. Native Americans burned the prairie because they knew that the bison were attracted to the new, tender growth of the warm season grasses. Later, pioneers came and tilled the land. Towns were built. Trails became railroads and highways. Today, less than 4% remains of that original prairie. Much of it is in the Flint Hills of Kansas. In order to preserve this national treasure, ranchers and rural landowners burn the prairie in the spring. It's a controlled burn, also called a prescribed burn. The burning of the prairie is what keeps it alive.
I think it's critical for people to understand that we want to preserve this tallgrass prairie ecosystem, and many people think this is one of the most endangered ecosystems in North America. Everybody's heard a lot about tropical forests, trying to save them, and we have one of the most endangered ecosystems in the world sitting right in our backyard here in the Flint Hills. It looks large, but it's relatively less than 4% of the original tallgrass prairie is still in existence. And the only way we're going to be able to maintain this prairie is through burning.
The prairie is burned to protect its ecosystem functions.
We've been burning this grasslands ever since people can remember. And undoubtedly it was burned before we ever came here, or it wouldn't still be a grasslands. It wouldn't have been a grasslands when we arrived. We do it because it's necessary to protect and maintain the tallgrass prairie ecosystem.
And without the fire, we lose the prairie in time. And here in Kansas, without fire, a prairie goes from a grassland to a woody state to almost a closed canopy in about 30 years here in eastern Kansas.
It wouldn't be a few trees mixed in with the prairie. It would be the devastation of the total ecosystem.
Most of our ecosystem types are considered to be fire dependent. In other words, if you remove fire, those systems no longer function as they used to. Fuel loads build up, habitat is degraded, and some of that is very easy to see in the Great Plains. The tremendous invasion of eastern red cedar, for instance, is a symptom of our alteration of the natural fire regime. You know, eastern red cedar is a native species, but probably in historic times it was relegated to fire protected areas, very steep draws, bottomlands, areas like that. But now with inadequate fire, or not frequent enough fire, it's able to come up onto the uplands and take over.
So if you burn at the right time of year, it'll actually diminish all of those unwanted species, invasive species, and actually totally enhances the biodiversity of the prairie.
Prescribed burning is probably the best tool we have ecologically and economically to keep the tallgrass prairie looking like a tallgrass prairie.
Controlled fires not only protect the ecosystem and control woody plants, it's an important economic factor in grazing cattle.
Throughout the Flint Hills, we're talking 4 million acres of native grasslands, and they probably take in somewheres in the neighborhood of 1 million cattle every year that come in to graze. And so it's a big industry.
Grazing cattle in the Flint Hills is about a $400 to $500 million income producing industry each year, which will eventually be lost in the absence of fire.
If the ranchers cannot utilize it for grazing, if there are restrictions on it put on it such that burning cannot occur, and it changes to that, then the livestock industry disappears and the tallgrass prairie disappears.
Where fire occurs on the landscape, where and when fire occurs, plays a huge role in determining where and when those grazers are going to be there. Burn it and they will come.
Fire removes the old growth, and it starts this new regeneration of the plants on the warm season prairie plants. It starts this new growth, and And the business that I'm in of grazing young cattle out there on grass, real intense. And so if I remove all that old growth, that's where the performance is at in these cattle.
Burning research at Kansas State University began back in the 1920s and has continued up to this time.
If you can go in during the spring and burn that grass, control the unwanted vegetation, get some new growth, that the research would show that the cattle could gain up to 1/4 pound a day more on grass that has been burnt prior to turning out than that hadn't been burned.
The average over we had a 48-year period where we looked at this, and we found out that it was essentially 30 pounds more per steer.
In addition to the livestock industry, prescribed fires are essential for wildlife.
If we're going to manage for native grassland bird species and native prairie species, we've got to have fire as a management tool. If we take that tool away, we won't be able to keep trees off of our native prairie. It'll start affecting native grassland bird populations, which are the fastest declining group of birds in North America right now.
Fire has a great many benefits to wildlife. And when I speak of wildlife in the grasslands, I'm usually thinking along the grassland birds, but even reptiles and other species, they depend on that grassland for habitat. Fire is a real important tool to use to manage that habitat, to provide all of their life needs, from nesting to raising a brood to making it through the winter back to the breeding season.
Anything that improves the health of grazing land improves the health of livestock, but it also improves wildlife habitat. We have prairie chickens and pheasant and quail and lots of turkey and deer, and those populations have increased while we burn.
Nancy and I go for a lot of walks. It's not just the wildflowers, it's not just the upland sandpipers that we see, it's everything that we see and smell and feel and touch out here that makes life in this prairie good.
It's very nice to sit here on our front deck and look out. We consider this our widescreen TV. We'll come sit out here and just survey the land. It's part of our relaxation.
Plants on the prairie capture carbon dioxide in the air and store it in the ground, a process known as carbon sequestration.
With the prairie, really we only see about 1/3 of what grows each year. 2/3 is grown below ground, and so there's a massive root system that's going on there. Of course, a lot of microbes and different things going on, the organisms under the soil surface. Typically, the prairie is going to replenish its root system or completely regenerate that root system in about a 3-year period. And so we can see a massive amount of carbon, or in the form of those roots, being put into the soil and replenishing. What we can see is that those roots over time are going to build that soil and increase the organic matter in that soil.
Prescribed burning means fewer chemicals are used and water quality is improved.
And we have ground cover year-round, and so we have infiltration of water. We can replenish groundwater that way. And as far as water quality, even from the runoff standpoint, and also of keeping that in rangeland, we're not going to have as many pesticides and things like that used, and fire is one of those tools without having to put a chemical out there.
Fire really works well on the trees, the cedar trees and the other trees. It clears the land, and then the grass comes back. And it's inexpensive, it's non-toxic.
If I can kill that tree or remove brush by using prescribed burning, it means I don't have to use another gallon of chemical, which is the alternative if I do not use fire.
Prairies you can mow, you can use mechanical methods to remove trees, but that doesn't remove that duff layer. It doesn't recycle those nutrients. They're just our ecosystem functions that you can't really replace without fire.
Stewardship is also important in the Flint Hills of Kansas.
Probably my most important job is sustainability, and that means sustainability in an ecological and biology sense, but also specifically sustainability to be able to pass down my ranch to my kids. And one of the most important things that I can do to be sustainable, to be a good, healthy operation, is to take care of the pasture grass. And a big part of that is burning pasture in order to maintain the health of the prairie.
and are doing our best to preserve this ecosystem for future generations, while at the same time providing a livelihood for our families and providing food and for our urban friends.
Although prescribed burning is important to the Flint Hills, parks in urban areas also use fire to manage their prairies.
Believe it or not, we do have beautiful prairies in Johnson County, tucked in between subdivisions and highways. We have diverse prairies with federally endangered plants. We burn in Shawnee Mission Park, our prairie area, specifically because it's the only prairie we have left in Johnson County. And we need the fire to stimulate the native grasses, to remove thatch. And once that fire rolls through, you get a lot of sun heating the ground, and that increases your germination, and those plants will grow and accelerate through the season. We also burn to fight woody growth. It's our most cost-effective way to fight dogwood and all the different plants that are encroaching from the edges of these small pocket prairies. We don't have a Flint Hills landscape with 3, 5, 6, 700 acres. We're talking 2-acre prairies, 5-acre prairies, half-acre prairies. We're looking at very small pockets that we're trying to control and manage and restore back to the way they were. Fire is an important part, and it's critical to managing prairies.
As cities grow, homes are often built along the edge of undeveloped land, making them at risk for wildfires. Information and workshops are available to help homeowners learn about appropriate landscape designs for this wildland-urban interface.
Taking steps to make it so where there's a break between the flammable wildland fuels and your property is one of the best things you can do. Programs such as FireWise Communities, FireAdapted Communities are great resources that are on the internet for teaching homeowners how to do this. You create breaks of non-flammable areas or less intense flammable areas through tree trimming, tree reduction, tree removal, as well as gravel and landscaping techniques to keep the fire away from the structure.
Most of the prescribed burning in the Flint Hills occurs during late March and April. This can cause air quality concerns in urban areas.
Well, prescribed burning, the smoke that comes off the burning, there's some constituents in there that are what we call the precursors to ozone particularly. Those are nitrous oxides and volatile organic compounds. Those are byproducts of combustion, and those are, when those are released into the atmosphere in the presence of sunlight, there's a chemical reaction that occurs that produces ozone. And that's primarily been what we've been concerned with in the downwind metropolitan areas from the burning in the Flint Hills, is seeing high ozone readings at our monitoring sites in Topeka, Wichita, Kansas City.
Since ozone isn't emitted directly from anything, it's formed through a chemical reaction with nitrogen oxides and VOCs and heat, sunlight. We see a lot of downwind formation of ozone, and so we'll see elevated ozone levels very early in the spring when we normally wouldn't see those elevated ozone levels based mainly on the meteorology, the hot sunny days that you'd really expect to see a high ozone level. We'll see elevated ozone levels from the Flint Hills burning in early April or late March when you wouldn't normally expect to see those kinds of ozone levels.
Ground level ozone is a pollutant that is one of 6 pollutants for which EPA sets health-based standards. And the reason it's a concern is because when we have elevated ozone levels in the Kansas City region, people experience breathing problems, and it can be especially dangerous for folks who have asthma, chronic bronchitis, and other respiratory illnesses.
We know that asthma affects 10% of the population. 1 out of 10 people have this respiratory condition. It's manifested as coughing, wheezing, labored breathing. And so 10% of the population is susceptible to this. In children, it can rise to as high as 20%. So 1 out of 5 people may be affected by the prescribed burning.
Air quality is also affected by daily activities in the city.
We have a very active air quality public education program that is focused on getting the public to take action to improve air quality. A lot of that is focused on trying to get people to drive less on high ozone days, to avoid the use of small gasoline engines, in other words, lawnmowers and weed eaters, because those cause a disproportionate amount of pollution.
There are strict regulations concerning air quality.
Generally speaking, if if we get a lot of people burning in certain days of the year, usually it's towards the middle or end of April, and they get big plumes of smoke that are put in the atmosphere. If we have wind out of the southwest, out of the Flint Hills, that typically will drive smoke into the Kansas City metro area. If for some reason we have a front that comes through or a push from the northeast, you can push all that smoke back into the Wichita metro area. And so then it becomes a problem for them because they have guidelines with the EPA that they don't want to cross.
We're charged by the Congress with carrying out the Clean Air Act. It's one of the most important environmental protection laws that we Americans have put in place in the last 50 years. It's contributed tremendously to improving our health, our livelihood. We live longer because our air is cleaner, and it actually protects property too.
Yeah, fire produces smoke. So there's been a lot of work done in terms of monitoring that and keeping the fires on a level that it doesn't exceed EPA standards.
Prescribed burning is something that's gone on for a very long time in the Flint Hills. It's not something that I feel like can go away at this point, the way the land is managed down there. It's something that will probably need to happen for a long time. It does have an impact on downwind communities like Kansas City. There's a lot we are doing locally, but there's always more that we can be doing locally. So being cognizant of your day-to-day activities, chaining some trips together if you can, making sure that when prescribed burning is going on at the parks, if you have an asthma or another respiratory condition, try to stay away from those parks on that day.
The recommendations for people who have asthma, obviously see your doctor, get your asthma under good control. Well-controlled asthma is less likely to flare up. If there is a burn, try to limit strenuous exercise during the daytime. Also, if you have significant problems, stay indoors during periods of heavy burns. If it's hot outside, the air conditioner with the recirculate rather than the fresh air can be helpful to limit the exposure to the outdoor contaminants during the time when they're high.
Many cities have a daily report which shows the current air quality. In Kansas City, that report is called the Skycast.
Mid-America Regional Council, which is the council of governments in the Kansas City area, issues a daily air quality forecast from April 1st through October 30th each year. That's called the Skycast, and basically it's a tool that people can use to know when high ground level ozone concentrations are expected. When we have moderate to high levels of ground level ozone, people who have respiratory conditions can take precautions to protect their health.
We have a Twitter account that we tweet the Skycast every day. We have a Facebook page where we post information. We have email lists you can sign up for and be emailed the information directly. We also put out press releases to all of the TV and radio stations. We do public awareness surveys every year, and something like 87% of the people find out about ozone alerts through TV meteorologists or TV newscasts. So that's a huge source of information for people. The Kansas City Scout message boards will show if there's an ozone alert the next day. It's usually posted in the Kansas City Star as well. We have a hotline that you can call to find out. There are so many ways to find out about it.
Let's take a look now at what ranchers are doing to improve the air quality in urban areas.
The state of Kansas has come up with a management plan that allows the burning to be done in a responsible way to try to minimize the impact on the health of people who live in the urban areas.
The Flint Hills Smoke Management Plan and website was created by the cooperative efforts of countless people with many perspectives on the Flint Hills.
We knew we had a lot of different players that we needed to learn from.
And we were given the charge to go ahead and move forward and develop the plan. We pulled together a group of probably 50 to 60 interested parties, and there was also a smaller group that was tasked with the responsibility for actually writing the plan. By the end of 2010, we'd completed the task, and the plan was complete and was adopted by the Secretary.
I was involved in discussing the smoke management plan when it was very first getting started. And I think the really biggest importance in that is that it is farmers and ranchers working together to avoid legislation or regulation. It's important that we're still able to take care of the prairie. These grasses are really important to me personally and to my industry as a whole. And so we need the ability, the freedom to be able to use fire on the prairie. So in order to maintain that freedom, we've got to show people that we're doing our best to manage it and to use it in the proper way.
Well, here is the home page for the Flint Hills Smoke Management Plan. The web page was developed by the folks over at K-State Extension, and they host the web page. And so this way a rancher can make a more informed decision. He can have better understanding of where his smoke and the emissions from that fire are going to be moving. On the far right, it has a link to the modeling tool.
The main thing we look for on the website is the wind direction. They have some graphics that you put in your location and the amount of acres that you will burn, and it has a little picture of where your smoke plume is going to go, and you just make sure that your plume is not going to go over an urban area. And if it is, they have some little warnings that come up that say that the burn is not advised at that time.
We have the 2 days up here so that a rancher can look at the current day if he had planned on burning that day, but also can look at the next day. And if he happens to be in a county where for the current day the conditions are not good, that county shows up in red. If he looks on the next day and sees that it's a better day, either a yellow day or a green day, then hopefully he can delay for one day and burn on that better day.
We try to keep it out of the major metropolitan areas. We look at the smoke models to see if we're going to have adequate mixing height so the smoke will dissipate and get away, or if it's going to stay down low and just hang around a long time. We try to stay away from that if we can.
When my husband and I discuss and we decide it's time to burn, that sometime this week we've got a few thousand acres we need to burn, we will go to the website for the smoke management plan and enter in what we'd like to burn that day. You can say how many acres, the location of it. It also asks you what level of grass there is. So is there a lot of regrowth? Is there not very much regrowth? And it estimates then how much smoke that you're going to make. And then it takes into account the wind patterns. And so where will your smoke go? How much smoke are you going to create? The smoke management plan helps me to decide where I'm going to burn, which pasture, and how many acres.
They try to get into that window where they will not cause problems for metropolitan areas. Not always easy to do. And the reason it's not always easy to do is that an area in the Flint Hills may want to burn beginning in the first couple of weeks of April, and it's raining, or the wind is blowing at 35 or 40 miles an hour, or the wind is out of the wrong direction.
So if you just divide the number of pastures we have to burn by 30 days, it's pretty manageable. If you start dividing it by 20 or 15 days or 10 days, then you really have to get something accomplished in those days. And it puts quite a little bit of pressure on you to get a lot done when you have the opportunity.
The art of burning is more of an art than a science, and has to be monitored year to year, how much you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and all those kinds of things. And that also can be incorporated with a smoke plan to eliminate some of those problems.
We need to try in every effort, both sides, to find out what's going to work for both. We don't want to hurt human health or cause human health concerns with that burning, but also we don't want to drive through a woodland in the east central part of Kansas. We need to see that prairie and value that. With the little bit we have remaining, we need to try to do the best practices we can. We also need to be innovative. We need to find technologies that if burning is the issue, are there other things we can do, or timing of fires and more possibility of spreading out the timing of fire. And I think research is needed so that we can find out if there's more options.
We're all part of the prairie. The grass, the plants, the forbs, everything is part of this whole. And fire is part of the whole. It has to be there. And if you take that away from it, it's going to change everything out there.
The prairie grasses are very important. We need forage, we need food. And to have good forage, the prairie has to be burned.
Of course, there is an economic benefit to us. Cattle will gain more weight on burned range than they will unburned. But besides that, and probably the bigger picture, the tallgrass native prairie was formed and developed with burning. And if we do not burn the range, we will lose the tallgrass prairie ecosystem, and it will go away in a relatively short time.
All these ecosystems, especially again the Flint Hills, the prairies that we have, are not a static system. You can't just walk off and leave them or put a fence up around it and shut a gate and not do anything to it and keep it as a prairie. That will never happen. Over time, that thing is going to end up going to be some type of forest, is what it's going to end up being.
And without that fire, we will lose ultimately the Tallgrass Prairie.
We're really blessed here in the Flint Hills that we have one of the last pieces of the prairie. And I guess I feel like it's my responsibility to care for that, because not only is it my livelihood, but I also feel like it's just this really natural treasure. And it's my responsibility to take care of it. And if we don't burn, then we'll end up with invasive species like shrubs and scrubby trees, and then finally it ends with a deciduous tree. But frankly, we'll lose the prairie if we allow those things to happen.
It's heartwarming to see people working together on something that affects so many people. The models have shown smoke making it all the way to the East Coast from the Flint Hills burning. It's not just Kansas City that's impacted. There's a lot of other people that are impacted. So to see us addressing something that impacts so many other people is really, it's encouraging.
For more information, visit the Flint Hills Smoke Management Plan at ksfire.org.
I do have a very deep, abiding love for the prairie and a passion to take care of it.
People should visit a prairie right after a burn. I think folks should see a prairie and smell it right after a fire and see the blackened landscape, and then come back a week later and see as the green starts to kind of spread across the ground, and then come back a couple weeks later and it becomes a carpet of vegetation and just rich and full of color, and then come back a month later and see just how beautiful and green it is. And I think once you experience it and you smell it and you touch it, you'll realize why the prairie needs fire.
People who live in urban areas have a lot of air quality challenges. We know, for example, in Kansas City and Wichita, we're still not where we need to be in providing clean and healthy air for everybody who lives there. But I think when it comes to the smoke in the spring and that limited period of time, we're doing a better job every year of keeping that out of the equation.
Keep in mind that Tallgrass Prairie is considered to be the most endangered ecosystem in North America. Something over 96, 97, 98% of the Tallgrass Prairie is now in cornfields or other uses.
Fire is a necessary tool for maintaining grassland ecosystems. If we take it out of the picture, if we no longer burn, we will lose these grassland ecosystems flat out. There's just no way to maintain it without fire.
If you totally eliminate fire from the landscape, and at some point in the near future, you're going to get to a point where these grasslands aren't going to be existed because they're going to be covered with red cedar or Osage orange.
And if we want it to be here for the next generation and the next generation, then we got to do what Mother Nature did before we came here, and we've got to burn it quite often to keep the grasslands a grassland.
So the ranchers in eastern Kansas are really kind of stewards of one of the last pieces of the most important ecosystem in North America. Well, that was unique for EPA because those tallgrass prairies don't really exist anyplace else in the United States.
Fire is very important in the prairie grasses. If there is no fire, there would eventually be encroachment of woody species.
Fire is critical to prairie chickens and other grassland birds because it keeps those trees out of the prairie. If you do not burn, you end up getting woody encroachment out into those grasslands, and what that does is provide habitat for the predators that prey upon prairie chickens and other grassland birds.
You can't mow it. You can't use a different type of practice to mimic fire. You might be able to do that some places, but not in the Flint Hills. There's too many rocks and the terrain is too rough. And so fire is the only way to maintain it. And it's too important of an ecological asset to lose.